Nostalgia is such an overused word. It pulls on our heartstrings, but come on, the past was better, right? It's practically a meme in itself. You see it everywhere online. It was better before. Modern media sucks. Like this if you were born in the wrong time. Take a stroll down memory lane and chat with your friends about the 90s. Besides the occasional Gen Xer grumbling about boomers, almost everyone will tell you that pop culture was better, things were cheaper, and people were just plain happier back then. But are we all just wearing rose-tinted glasses every time we look back? Is the way we remember the past truly reflective of what it was, or are we just chasing the golden age of our imaginations? In this video, the answer might surprise you. As you can tell, we live in a society, so to cope with this problem, we all subconsciously crave a little something you call copium. Copium allows you to get those little fixes of dopamine to feel better about your crappy life, and nostalgia is the perfect type thereof, especially for dejected Zoomers, as demonstrated by the relentless manipulation by the major big fucking the corporate takeover of nostalgia has made me wonder if, in a historical sense, art and media have stopped reflecting their time in favor of nostalgia bait. When you go through the motions of your life day by day, nothing really changes. But when we look back after so many years, everything is somehow different. This gets even weirder for me when I talk to young Zoomers who are barely out of high school, when they themselves are nostalgic for stuff for which they weren't even alive for in the first place. You don't know fucking Ed, Edd n Eddy? You didn't watch Kids Next Door? So if you stop for a second and really understand your true feelings, it's more of a dark reminder of something more sinister happening in our nihilistic era of nothingness. Not only is your childhood gone, but so is the monoculture, and something we all need to get used to is that there will probably never be a time in history again where we're all united under one piece of pop culture. Otakus have anime, and normies have Disney. Music lovers stick to whatever genre they listen to, etc., etc. Big fucking deal. Before the world was globalized, we weren't connected enough to share the same entertainment. But now we're so globalized that everyone has atomized into their own little world. Take a movie you used to love as a kid and really try to re-experience it in the current moment. You realize the lights of your childhood are on, but the pure feeling you had before isn't home. Of course, you'll still get those brief moments which keep you coming back for more, forking your money over to see your childhood heroes again on the big screen whenever the advertising campaign finds you at the right time. Or maybe you just do it on your own time. There's just something about this experience that is missing. And on top of that, it doesn't help that lately these little recommendations portraying nostalgia as an illness have been appearing on my YouTube feed, telling me to
stop it, get some help.
How nostalgia works. 6 tips that will help you stop feeling overcome nostalgia. Okay. You see, you wouldn't think that a word once considered a psychopathological disorder, literally meaning the pain from longing for home, would become so popular among modern people. Chapter 1. Nostalgia as a consumer command. So there's a reason that we're all nostalgia-loving masochists who love frustration. You see, there's an it factor to nostalgia which comes into play when you dust off old things in your parents' attic that you used to use regularly. You know, things like posters, games, and movies, which transport you back to a time when they were part and parcel of the everyday. Nostalgia junkies will feel it by simply touching an old Super Nintendo controller. Yes! Yes! Yeah. Others by seeing their childhood heroes reprise old roles, like Ewan McGregor as Obi-Wan, harkening back to the old days of the prequels. That shit so. And if you're subscribed to Tantris Humble, and I hope you are, then I have a feeling I know exactly how you'd try to re-experience this feeling. Maybe an N64 with a copy of Ocarina of Time, while opening a bag of chips and a bottle of Coke and sitting down in front of the screen as that beautiful piano opening greets you. You see that beautiful horse coming onto the screen, you're like, yeah! That's me! When I was a kid! And then you remember all the good times flooding your consciousness. Ah, this is why I don't need drugs. But then it hits you because you're like, shit! Something isn't right about being 26 years old and wanting to re-experience your childhood because you feel infantilized, you know? You know, I got bills to pay, I don't have time for this. As a victim of it myself, I could say that the first case of the nostalgia started with one of my favorite film series coming back to the theaters. The Star War. The Force is Awake. And I was like, lightsabers? The Force? Darth Helmet? My childhood is coming back! But then they killed Han Solo. Even when it was beginning to die as a franchise in the eyes of most people, before I gave up on Star Wars completely, I remember getting excited at the possibility of seeing Obi-Wan and Anakin whacking their sabers at each other. That's not what I meant! I look at the crumbling entertainment industry and can't help but remark that over the years, it's pumped out remakes and sequels to past successes by capitalizing on our nostalgia as a safe way to assure corporate profit. Outside of your monotonous life of going to work and seeing the world for the dystopia that it's become, what is there to do with yourself other than find something that reminds you of a better time or a world that isn't this one? You know, you wouldn't feel nostalgia if you perfectly recreated the original feeling of whatever that time was. And that's how you know the manipulation is deliberate. You see, Hollywood tells your subconscious through advertising that all you need to do is watch this new Star Wars movie, buy that remake of Resident Evil, play this Nintendo game, or fill your room with posters to match one aesthetic, to fill the void in your heart, but it won't. Because nostalgia itself is the longing, it is the emptiness, and to cater to that is to ensure the emptiness remains. Originality, in large part, takes a back seat for this marketing strategy, and so we're just getting served the same reheated leftovers over and over. But is that actually true? Is entertainment really getting less creative, or does it just feel that way? Well, one curious Reddit user, Spicer2, decided to look into the numbers using data from Box Office Mojo and crunched the stats on the top 50 highest grossing films worldwide from 1978 to 2019 to see how many were based on original ideas versus reboots, remakes, or adaptations. After 1990, there weren't a lot of sequels coming out, but then in the early 2010s, whoosh, Chapter 2. Stuff as an anchor in time. Even the past, which we long for now, was littered with nostalgia bait. You know the Beatles, the famous Fab Four from the 1960s? Paul, George, and Ringo came back together to record over a John Lennon demo because John Lennon was shot. I mean, sure, let's acknowledge John Lennon and the Beatles had a legacy everyone wanted to honor, but another part of it was playing into the people's desire for the Beatles to come back together. For the past to come back and visit us in the now. They're like little material anchors that we can point out and say, hey, look at this thing right here. That's the 90s. That was it. Just take a look at how we fetishize the 1980s and the 1990s. My Gen X parents would always say, hey, you're wearing a flannel shirt. You know, we used to wear flannel shirts all the time in the 1990s, Kurt Cobain and all that. Ha 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 ha. As though that time period had a monopoly on this item's essence, and I guess it does?
The effects that you see on the screen right now serve as a reminder of a different time. I've put on lens distortion and made it feel like you're watching it on a CRT TV. It's almost like we're back in 1996, but when you really think about it, we're not. It's 2024. It's just a reminder of a different time when we would use CRT TVs on a regular basis. But now that we don't need to, it's almost like something is missing. Like we want to go back to that time and re-experience it, but we can't. That would be impossible, and that impossibility creates nostalgia.
Walter Benjamin talks about this thing called aura, which is all about the vibe an original piece of art has. He argues that arts used to have this sense of uniqueness, like it had to be experienced in person, in a specific time and place, surrounded by tradition and ritual. It's pretty hard to look at a painting like this from the 18th century and not feel the zeitgeist oozing out of it. Think of the Mona Lisa in the Louvre. You're standing there with hundreds of tourists, but the painting itself is one of a kind. That physical, irreplaceable object holds the power, the aura. You're in the same room as this thing which has seen history. Is that something that a print or a photo can give you? No. So consider the advent of mechanical reproductions. Now art gets copied endlessly, and it loses that aura. A photo of the Mona Lisa plastered on a mug or an Instagram post just doesn't hit the same. The ritual, the tradition, the feeling of, I'm here, I'm the one witnessing this, is all stripped away. Sure, you see it, but you're not experiencing it in that unique way anymore. When something from the past gets rebranded, rebooted, or sequelized, the aura of the original gets lost forever. We watch remakes hoping to relive that authentic moment, but the magic isn't there, no matter how close it seems. That original feeling, the aura, is gone. What we end up getting is a shadow of the original, and it ends up feeling a little empty, a little off. Yet we keep going back, trying to chase that lost feeling, the original spark we can't quite touch again. There was a magic in sitting on the edge of my bed, enjoying those games while my parents made dinner in the kitchen. But the nostalgia wasn't just longing for the game itself. As one learns when replaying it, it was in fact the feel of my room at 6 p.m. in the afternoon. A specific moment frozen in time in the late 2000s and early 2010s. The technology, the atmosphere. You can't just play that game again and expect to recapture the magic of before. All of those facets are gone forever, and you feel empty. In reality, it's just a memory A time from when you were a kid that won't come back because culturally you just can't. I mean, why the hell would you wait for a show to air on cable at a specific moment in time when you can just stream or download it whenever you want? Why would you get out your old GameCube when you can just emulate it on your Chapter 3, Video Games and the Evolution of Art. Retro games did it better, or so they say. Which kind of retro games, you ask? Games from the 90s. Those seem to take the top spot for most. Ocarina of Time, Super Mario 64, Super Metroid, Doom, GoldenEye, Pokemon, Hotel Mario? But why? Why not the 80s? And moreover, why not modern games? Why don't they have the same emotional appeal? Well, besides nostalgia, games in this era reached a level of abstract perfection, something the Greek philosopher Plato would describe as reaching the ideal form of a concept in the material world. But alright, before I put you to sleep with fucking a philosophy lesson, if any of you are Nintendo fans like me, then you'll know that ever since Breath of the Wild, Nintendo seems to be a bit lost on what to do with Zelda. Let alone pretty much all of its big names. Honestly, because everything is either experimentation or riding the coattails of something better before. Most recent releases are just rehashes of fantastic games from before. And don't get me wrong, I love a good playthrough of Paper Mario The Thousand Year Door, Metroid Prime, or even The Legend of Zelda The Wind Waker. Ocarina of Time had a very concrete story, limited gameplay, a specific charm from the limitations of the medium. There were plenty of enemies, and just a cultural impact that left an impression on the minds of millions and millions, and Breath of the Wild is an open world, places to explore, and a bunch of pig monsters or whatever. Neat! But then what? Your sword breaks. Oh. Only a few kind of enemies. Oh, only 4 dungeons? What? So this experimentation is great. I think Breath of the Wild is a fucking fantastic game, and I don't need to tell you that, okay? Okay, I think that we have reached a peak in the medium and are now in what's known as the Hellenistic stage of video games. Well, what's that, fellow netizen? You say you don't know what Hellenistic means? Well, prepare your pants, because we're about to do a fucking history lesson. There's a pattern that art forms tend to follow. At the start, they're really raw and they don't know what the fuck they're doing. But then they hit a golden age, and eventually they slip into experimentation, or even decadence. In Greek art, this is known as the Archaic, Classical, and Hellenistic periods. Take any abstract concept and imagine that it can be in the real world, but you have to do so in the most perfect way possible. So for example, there's an ideal version of the human body which the Greeks attempted to achieve. And by the classical era, they had done so well that they achieved the distilled, most straightforward version of that perfection. The archaic period before it, yeah, it's kind of mid. Look at this, it's too stiff and underdeveloped. I can't do this shitty. But the Hellenistic, well, I mean, it's super well done. But it's not straying away from the form. It's just dramatic and borders on excess, and loses touch with the simplicity of that previous perfection. Video games seem to have followed a similar trajectory. In the early days, from the 70s to the mid-80s, games were difficult to control. I mean, just look at this game called E.T. So gaming hit its cultural peak in the 90s when the mechanics were solid and not so drawn out that they felt bloated. I like using Super Mario 64 as the classical example because it basically got everything right without exaggerating anything. If Super Mario Bros. Is archaic, Super Mario 64 is classical, and Super Mario Odyssey is Hellenistic. The point I'm trying to make is that there are far more of us who are nostalgic for 64 than NES Mario Bros. Because 64 captured the essence of video games in such a perfect way that we've not been able to get back to it since. And moreover, it's unlikely we'll ever get anything like that in video games as we currently know them, until the medium reinvents itself again, that is. Arthur C. Danto's theory on the end of art and its philosophical implications provide a pretty cool lens through which we can examine our nostalgia for 90s video games, and the darker aspects of nostalgia before we wrap things up here. So, Danto argued that the meaning of art is not solely found in its physical form, but is deeply embedded in its historical and philosophical context. Danto's concept of perceptual equivalency and the historical progression of art illustrate that art's value and meaning are tied to that original context in which it was created. In layman's terms, perceptual equivalency is all about making art look as real as possible. The idea is that art should try to mimic reality so closely that it's almost like a mirror. If you look at a painting or sculpture, the goal is for it to reflect what you'd see in the real world, so it feels like a perfect realistic representation. Early art history, as described by figures like Giorgio Vasari, portrayed art as progressing towards greater realism. Greater realism is just a fancy way of saying that art has been striving to get more and more lifelike over time. So if you look at older art, it might be more stylized or abstract, but as time goes on, artists aim to capture more and more detail and accuracy, trying to make their work look exactly like the real thing. The idea is paralleled in the evolution of video games, where 90s titles achieved a form of perfection that resonated with their time. After around 2007, open-world games became all the rage, graphics got better, and developers became obsessed with making everything ultra-realistic and crammed with content. But you can feel the lack of identity in many modern games compared to older ones. I think this is why Ocarina of Time gets so much love, even though it was released 20 years before Breath of the Wild. These games are not just technological artifacts, but represent a specific cultural moment and design philosophy, similar to Dante's claim that art is appreciated not only for its aesthetic qualities, but also for its place in history. What we're really seeing is the shadow of something that had its meaning in a different time, which explains why we're left chasing a feeling we can never capture again. This evolution bred what we ultimately came to know as the dark side of nostalgia. Our yearning for older games is not just about their gameplay or graphics, but about the historical and philosophical context they represent. The intense emotional connection we have with these games can create a skewed perception that the past was inherently superior, overshadowing the achievements of contemporary gaming. This longing for the past can also obscure the complexities and shortcomings of older games, leading to an idealized view of history. But this idea helps us understand why nostalgia for older media feels so powerful. Like earlier art forms, they're cherished not only for their technical aspects, but for the rich cultural context they represent. So all in all, when you examine all of this, you begin to understand why the older stuff is so deeply embedded in our minds. Just be aware the next time you see nostalgia bait, it's those corporate fuckers taking advantage of what can never be again. Hey, hope you subscribed. I release videos usually once every 2 to 3 weeks depending on how hard it is to research and animate them. Check out our music and Discord too if you so please. Otherwise, scrotly motley.